Previously on Classroom Hacks. If you've ever walked by one of Peter's classrooms early in the morning, maybe 8, 9 a.m., you might hear some music playing outside the door. You don't always hear that when you walk by a class. Why do you play the music you play, and what kind of music do you play?
And this is, Eric, means before class starts. I mean, I sometimes, like many teachers, will use music or a movie clip or a TV clip or something in class. But sometimes, a variety of reasons, I want to create a culture in the classroom where it's fun, they feel comfortable, it's a way to bond. I take requests. I tell them, okay, who wants to give me some pre-class music? And I do have one, what's the word I'm looking for, criterion, is it can't be something that's too, I joke, I say parental advisory, explicit, only because I don't know what offends people.
Sure, you can't have them play straight out of Compton.
Yeah, I mean, again, students might like that, and that's fine. But if it's going to distance 4 or 5 students from me, but genre is up for grabs. It could be classical, it could be hip hop, it could be rock,
some
it could
Conway
be
Twitty,
classical, Conway Twitty, it could be Jethro Tull. I mean, it could be a whole variety. So yeah, just to wake us up, to connect, have some fun before class starts.
Good morning, everyone. We hope you enjoyed that short snippet from our previous episode, Personality Test. As a reminder, each week Classroom Hacks provides you with a new episode bright and early every Monday morning. Additionally, don't forget that you can find exclusive and free Classroom Hacks content on 4 social media platforms: SoundCloud, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Just search for Classroom Hacks on those respective social media networks. This week, we discuss the evolving topic of teacher versus student-centered learning. Teachers and students, the yin and yang of the academic universe. However, when it comes to the classroom, who should be the primary point of focus? And, when it comes to learning, what is the best way to maintain some of our time-honored pedagogical principles while integrating some of the more modern and useful student-based techniques? On this episode, we examine those questions. As always, sit back, relax, enjoy this week's episode of Classroom Hacks, Teacher versus Student-Centered Learning.
Popping was always...
I was supposed to be an extra in Breakin' 2 Electric Boogaloo because of my mad breakdancing skills. Unfortunately, that day, I forgot to bring a piece of cardboard to dance on.
So and your parachute pants were in the dryer.
It's true, and I lent my gold chains to MC Hammer, so I didn't have them at the time.
I think when Breaking 2 came out, were you even born?
I don't know if I was born for Breakin' 1. Or was it just called Breakin'?
It was Breakin'.
Yeah.
Breakin' was circa 1984.
So I was probably just born for Breakin'. I was breaking in when Breakin' was made popular.
You were a Breakin' baby.
I was. I came breaking out of the womb. Maybe that's too much for the audience.
All right.
Anyway, we are back to your favorite educational podcast, live from the Pantheon of Pedagogy, the Mecca of Methodology, your vacation from vacation, the educational playground, where you can learn to seriously take teaching not so seriously. As Pedro said last time, we are your pedagogical bartenders. This is, and we are, Classroom Hacks. Pedro, how are you?
So far, so good. Always good to team up with you, my friend. And yes, bartenders in the sense that we try to dispense knowledge and wisdom that has been given to us over the years. Now, you might be listening to us thinking it's not knowledge and wisdom, or parts of it are. And that's fine. We know we're growing. We are students of our craft as well. And we know that if you, the listener, were doing your own podcast, we would have a lot to learn from you as well.
And sometimes we let the knowledge and wisdom and advice overflow, like you might get in a bar, to the point where they might tell you, you've had enough. And you say, I'll tell you when I've had enough.
Or we can go Glengarry Glen Ross and say, put the wisdom down.
And that might just be a segue into one of maybe our future opening bits. That's something I've always wanted to do, the famous Alec Baldwin, Glengarry Glen Ross scene of coming from Mitch and Murray.
Yes.
Because I'm from what does he say? I'm here on a mission of mercy.
Mission of mercy.
From Mitch and Murray. Speaking of missions, today we are looking at teacher-centered or student-centered education, and this is a topic that is becoming more discussed. It's sort of in the same vein and the same plateau as the idea of growth versus proficiency. This is something of the idea of how do we learn better? How do students learn better? How do you get more out of your class? And so kind of a quick breakdown of both teacher-centered education, and this comes from the Concordia University of Portland. A quick
Wait, so we're defining terms right now?
Yeah, we're just quick definition.
Well, we need to define terms. Absolutely. Always define terms first.
Teacher-centered education, students put all of their focus on the teacher, you talk, and the students exclusively listen. During activities, students work alone, and collaboration is not so much discouraged, but there's less collaboration. The pros with this: when education is teacher-centered, the classroom remains orderly, students are quiet, and you retain full control of the classroom and its activities. Because students learn on their own, they learn independence and make their own decisions. Because you direct all classroom activities, you don't have to worry that the students will miss an important topic. The cons of this sort of education is
Wait. Don't give the cons yet. Maybe we should just define it and then talk about them both.
Okay, so then there were no cons yet. We won't do the cons.
Okay.
And then student-centered instruction is that when classroom operates with student-centered instruction, students and instructors share the focus. Instead of listening to the teacher exclusively, students and teachers interact equally. Group work is encouraged and students learn to collaborate and communicate with one another. The pros of this is that students learn important communicative and collaborative skills through group work. Students learn to direct their own learning, ask questions, and complete tasks independently. Students are more interested in learning activities when they can interact with one another and participate actively. So these are sort of the two pillars of educational discussion right now. And so we're going to kind of break these things down and see some of our experiences with student-centered learning and teacher-centered instruction. So Pedro, what can you kind of give us in regards to both of these?
Quick question first. Do you make that distinction in class? Like, do you tell your class, here's the difference between these two styles of teaching?
Well, in magic, there's the aspect called the prestige. And the prestige is the reveal to a lot of these different things. I never give the reveal. I am Oz. I keep the curtain closed because no one sees the wizard. Nobody know how. But there's an element that I just keep to myself because I don't differentiate between the two because they don't always know.
So you show it, not tell it.
Correct. Okay. Absolutely. Much as they would say is if you were a creative writer, show, don't tell. So back to you, the student-centered education connections that you might have and the teacher-centered education.
Yeah, I am excited for this topic because this is something where, like you said, it's a very big topic, very important topic of discussion right now. And there's a lot of different takes on this. Look, I don't know how you were modeled, but growing up, because I'm older than you, 90% of the teachers I had were teacher-centered in terms of teacher lectures. Mm-hmm. And don't get me wrong, I had some wonderful lecturers growing up all throughout school. Some of them were captivating, spellbinding. And that's where the hack, the classroom hack comes in. I just revealed that. And so there's a time and place for lecture, and it can be very valuable. But that's the majority of the teaching I had, even all the way through grad school. But then coming to be a teacher on my own and doing some research, doing some studying, you want to grow, you want to learn, you come across this whole body of literature, this whole pedagogical philosophy, and which is the way that higher ed is going, is to learner-centered or student-centered teaching. And I don't know if I've got it all down pat in terms of I have this perfect view of what this should look like. I think there's good things about both, but the one reason why I think student-centered teaching, the beautiful thing about it is, let's just face it, just on a common sense level, when we're engaged as human beings, when we're doing, I think we have a better chance of learning. I mean, that's not a profound insight. People listening probably know this already. So that's one of the big benefits, and one of the big changes I've made over the years is to become more student-centered. The whole sometimes cliche slogan of, hey class, it's not my class, it's not your class, it's our class. And all of us in here, I do tell my students that all of us in here are responsible for what we learn in here, for how good the class is going to be. It's not just me. It's going to be all of us together. We're in this together.
You're absolutely right in terms of how education has been for the last century, maybe even longer than that, is that people would sort of gather and there would be one person speaking in front of a class, and they would give their insight, they would give their wisdom, they would give their knowledge, and we would learn from that. And that was good in a sense where it kind of kept everything organized, it kept everything centered, it kept everything focused. But what we also saw from that is that it creates people who teach the same way, who are the same way, and then ideas don't necessarily evolve in different ways because they're always taught the same. And whether we were in grade school, junior high, high school, and then even in parts of college and grad school, there were plenty of people who focused on teacher-centered learning. But as we've sort of progressed in our current culture, many modern instructors and many instructors who have sort of came from different molds are starting to take on the student-centered sort of experience. I know that when I first started, that I was very timid. I was very afraid of doing student-centered stuff because I felt like I needed a certain level of control. I felt I would lose my sense of authority. But what I also felt when that time went on was that I've lost a little bit of myself because I'm not the type of person who likes to maintain that level of control all the time. I like students to interact. I like students to get together, like Pedro said. It's our class. It's not just my class. And in reality, as speaking with the previous episode in terms of personality, I don't like to talk for long periods of time. I'm not the type of lecturer who can go up there and speak for hours upon end and hear the sound of my own voice. I hate the sound of my own voice, which might be ironic because we have a podcast. But I like when students find out about each other, when you see that sort of eureka moment on their face when they discover something. And a little bit of advice, at least from what I've heard from different people, depending on the type of school you're applying to, and this will be an episode in the future about applying for a job, is do your research. Find out what type of program the school runs. And for example, in certain schools around here, they might be looking for more student-centered or student-oriented sort of teaching. And that could be something that if you are that type of instructor, gives you a little bit of an advantage over instructors who are very used to just sort of speaking in front of the class and having a very teacher-centered sort of learning. We're going to take a quick commercial break here, and when we come back, we will get into maybe some examples of our student-centered and teacher-centered experiences, ones that might have worked and maybe ones that potentially didn't go over so well. And so we will be right back after these words from our sponsors.
Hello again, everyone. If you're looking for a great educational experience this October, check out Writing on the Edge, Composing Beyond Boundaries. Each year, Writing on the Edge, or WOTE for short, brings educators from all over the Midwest to the College of DuPage to have conversations about new and helpful techniques in the classroom. These conferences are a wonderful learning hub for instructors looking to network, discover new methods in the classroom, and receive advice about teaching at the college level from faculty just like you. Moreover, what's truly great about WOTE is that it's entirely inclusive. So not only can you enjoy the sage advice the conference has to offer, you can also be part of it by submitting a proposal of your own. If you would like to utilize a free and available template for submitting a proposal, please be sure to check out the Classroom Hacks Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram sites. If you would like more information about the WOTE event, please be sure to reference their website at writingontheedge.org.
And we are back. And so sort of speaking again to this idea of student-centered versus teacher-centered learning, one thing that we want to sort of address at the same time is that neither of these particular methods are complete, that they are not foolproof either way. As we talked about the previous episode, you might have a personality that might be gauged
or might lean more towards one or the other. Does that mean that you should completely jump ship and do the other one because you think it's better? Absolutely not. But we're also in a current time, a very interesting time in our culture, where we feel like we got the ball rolling on this one idea, let's keep going with it. And what that does sometimes is it's great because we're learning all these new things and developing these new things, but at the same time, it also creates a division and makes people think that because we have this great new thing, that for some reason, the traditional idea or the original idea has somehow lost its value, when that's absolutely not true. And Pedro, you were bringing something up over the break that I thought was very interesting in showing and revealing and reminding people of the value that comes with both of these types of teaching.
Yeah, I read books like a lot of people do.
Or listen. What are those? What did you say you do?
Books?
Is that how it's pronounced? Is that the name?
Or should I say blog?
You read these words that are in these things.
Yes, it's not on a Kindle. It's not on a Nook. Yeah, I haven't really gone into the whole ebook thing. I just love having a book in my hand, but that's maybe another podcast for another day. We have this whole idea of student-centered teaching where it's one thing I think is of value, and I feel like I'm jumping all over the places here. One of the great things about it is in student-centered teaching, it seems to be the case that the goal of education, and again, you have different teachers or different people break this down differently, but one thing I take away from is content is not the goal. You're teaching them content, whatever your topic is, but content is used as a means to an end, and I know we mentioned this in earlier podcasts, to teach them how to critically think or how to develop personal people skills, adaptability, listening, interacting, problem solving, all those things. And so it's engaging them to use different parts of themselves, not just the part where they memorize facts. But at the same time, we can't work on skills without the facts. So we don't mean to say, we're not drawing this false dichotomy, either it's all lecture and you're teacher-centered, or you do little, if any, lecturing and you're student-centered. No, it's not. The way I understand it, and tell me if you agree with this, Eric, it's not as much of the activities that you do necessarily, it's how you do them. Because even a lecture can be student-centered if done in that way. And so lecturing is important, it has a place, but if that's all we do, we have to ask ourselves, is that the best way for them to not just learn the material, but to learn what to do with it, how to think about it? Not like, when I say how to think about it, not, they have to have our views, but more so how to think critically about it, how to understand it, how to synthesize it, how to evaluate it, those types of things.
And I think to add to that, when you bring up that great point about how to think about it, is how to think about it in their own way, in their way that makes sense to them. And that is the goal of student-centered learning that is attached to teacher-centered learning, is the idea that, I'll use the example of two of my friends. When they were in grad school, one was the epitome of a studier. They had to make PowerPoints, they had to make flashcards, they had to do something a certain way, and they had to study for 3 hours at a time, take a break, study for 3 hours at a time in a completely silent room. The other friend was the one who needed music, who needed to get up and move around, who needed to have as much information on one card and then kind of cram that in. They studied for the same material, and they both did well. It doesn't mean that one way is right versus one way is wrong. It just indicates that we are learners of different capacities, that we are learners of different methods. And teacher-centered is great because, as Pedro said, it sets up the foundation, but student-centered then tries to elicit or tries to pull that potential out of each student for them to figure out their own path to success. And one of the things that I think many instructors may get caught up on in our current culture is that, well, if a student has an issue with a problem or needs to figure something out, that they immediately go to Google and they Google the answer, and we think that's bad. They shouldn't do that. They should actually put the time in. But the reality is they're still learning, that they found a way to find the answer, and if the answer stays, that's essentially what we look for. We want that sort of,
and provided they go to the right website.
right, correct. That we want that sort of understanding and comprehension, but we learn also at the same time that there is more than one path to an answer. And I think that is the part of teacher-centered learning that tends to get a bit more murky, is because people think that teacher-centered learning only puts emphasis on one way to find an answer, when that's not necessarily true. It's just that student-centered learning tends to put the focus on, let's figure out the different pathways. Teacher-centered learning never indicates that this should be the only way to do it. It's just happening to come from one source, which happens to be the teacher. So Pedro, I think you and I maybe fall into the camp, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm speaking.
Oh, I will.
If I'm speaking, if I'm speaking ill of your teaching practices, I feel that you and I may fall more in the camp of combined teacher-centered, student-centered teaching, where we might use a little bit of both in our classroom. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it's a tough question to answer completely, because I don't claim to have to know the full distinctions between them, but I know that I'm not completely one or the other. That I do know, so I can say it's a combination of both. I like to think that I'm going more in the direction of student-centered, only because, and this is just from my own experience, and like I said earlier in the podcast, when we're engaged, we're going to have a better chance of learning. It's the old, those who are doing it are learning it.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, if I want to learn how to hit a baseball, I can watch videos over and over and over again, which is going to help. But if you can't replace being in the batting cage or facing a pitcher where you're actually swinging the bat, trying to connect, see the ball, or if I was Bill Murray, be the ball.
Exactly.
Oh, no, that wasn't, that was Chevy Chase.
Oh, yeah, Chevy Chase,
yeah.
right.
And so there's something about the doing.
Right movie, wrong character.
Yeah, exactly. But both are important. So I'm not saying don't watch videos on how to hit a curveball. We need that. But if we really want to learn it, we got to do it.
And so speaking of that, the learning and the doing, do you have an example from class that you might use that can sort of show how that the utilization of teaching and student-centered, or maybe a combination of both? Do you have anything for us?
Yeah, I can give you a simple example. Teaching philosophy in Intro to Philosophy class, say we're talking about some issue, an ethical issue. An example that comes to mind, well, of course, teaching philosophy, debate is built in, because philosophers debate, as they say, life's most important questions. And so not too long ago in class, this is Intro to Philosophy, we had a discussion on whether or not we have a soul. And there's articles in or essays in the book for and against. Some philosophers say yes, some say no. And so I have them engage with both sides to try to evaluate the arguments. Now, mind you, this comes probably halfway through the semester, but in the beginning of the semester, we were doing critical thinking and logic. And so they're building up tools on how to evaluate, how to understand a thesis, how to evaluate, how to pluck out the reasons, the evidence, the support, and then to evaluate, does the evidence support the thesis? Does it support the conclusion? And so it's one thing they can read about it and say, okay, I have a better understanding now of some arguments for and against, or I have a better awareness of them. But then when we get together in class, I break them up into small groups and they get a set amount of time, 3-4 minutes, somewhere in that ballpark, to come up with why they think these arguments succeed or they fail. Where is the weak premise? Where is the premise that is not necessarily true? How can they improve the argument? Or sometimes I will present an argument for a view and I'll role play that person. And I'll say, or I'll say, if this philosopher, if Descartes or David Hume or Aristotle were in the room right now, what would you say back to them? And so I just try to get them to employ or utilize some of the tools we built up earlier in the semester, and just to have them use those tools throughout the semester. So when they leave here, when they leave school, when they leave the class and the class is over, they can read an article about politics or about religion or about health or about climate change, whatever the topic is, and just be a little better equipped to evaluate it on their own.
That's a great point to bring up, because essentially that's what student-centered and teacher-centered learning at least both have in common, is that they want to have some sort of toolbox available for students at the end of the day. Because when students can take those tools, like you would get at a great therapy session, and apply them to the different elements of their life, that gives them a different perspective, that gives them different entry points to breach topics. One example that I like to use in class is when we get to the evaluation section of the semester. Students have to evaluate different things. There's 4 different ways to evaluate, whether we're making a judgment about quality, challenging a particular judgment about quality, establishing a ranking or comparison, or looking at criteria used to make an evaluative judgment, that students will apply one of these particular measures to an assignment. So one assignment that I use is a group activity where I break them up, and they essentially become their own marketing groups. They have to develop a marketing campaign for a particular topic.
Well, that's a great idea.
They can either take something that is already in existence and revise it, they can challenge it, they can modify it a certain way, or they can come up with something completely unique. I've had different students come up with ideas like making skinny jeans popular, or extending the weekend by a particular day. And so it gives them a chance to be creative. There are boundaries that are within the limitations of, okay, you have to make sure that you utilize the particular types of evaluations, but there are no boundaries to the type of marketing campaigns they can use. They can look up the most successful types of marketing campaigns. They can find out what worked, what didn't work. But in reality, the majority of the work is on them, because they learn what will work. They have to decide amongst the group, does this sound successful? Does this make sense? Will this come over well? Sometimes I might attach extra credit to it. Maybe the group that has the best marketing campaign, the best selling points, the most logical types of marketing will win extra credit. And then other times I might just use it as an overall learning experience for them. I try to limit the amount of time that I might speak. Maybe I'll just set up the premise, and then I'll have enough time at the end to really allow for conversation and for them to really pitch their particular campaign. But the goal is to give them the opportunity to learn on their own, to really get their feet wet. And even for instructors, one of the things we always talk about here is being creative. I put together this podcast because I love podcasts. I like the idea of having an open platform. But the reality is I had to learn a lot of this on my own. But it doesn't mean that I didn't go out and read material from people who you might say are just lecturing, but they are giving you advice. They are telling you how to do different things. And then you just put your own spin on it. You put your own creative mind at work, but you are really discovering it. And at the end of the day, what that does is that it allows you to build something yourself. And it becomes an extension of you, opposed to necessarily just being something, a replication or a duplication of something else someone put together. And that's at the goal of all student-centered learning. That's at the goal of new ideas, new exploration. And when it comes to teacher-centered learning, your goal is really just to give them the premise, give them the context, give them the understanding, the tools, and how they use those tools is then up to them.
How do they react to it when you give them an assignment? Do they get excited? Do they seem eager to sink their teeth into it?
Here's the thing. I've come to find that group activities, especially when there's a bit of leniency mixed in with a little bit of structure as well, if you give them too much leniency without any structure, it's easy for them to fall off bounds. If you give them too much structure and not enough leniency, some of the projects start to sound repetitive. So it's about tweaking. It's about finding the correct balance between those two things. But when you really get it, when you hit that home run, you see the spark, that spark of eureka, that spark of this is fun, this is also interactive, this is also engaging, and that they actually got what you wanted them to get out of the particular assignment. And one great quote I heard a long time ago from one of my favorite shows in Futurama was that when you do something correctly, people will think you didn't do anything at all. And if a student feels like they got it on their own, but you really gave them the foundation for it, then you did your job. At least that's my opinion on it. Anything else before we wrap this up, Pedro, that you wanted to add?
Yeah, and one thing to get them on board, because sometimes students, as you know, they resist this. They resist the type of group work or this, hey, teacher, you like to have this engagement thing. I talk to other people. But as we know, some students just want to be there. They say, give me the facts. What do I have to do to memorize these facts? Or spit them back out on a paper. Let me get my good grade, and I'm out of here. I don't need these other things that you're talking. So one thing, what do we do when we encounter that? Because we do in a class of, say, 30 students. It's not just everyone's like, hurrah. One thing I try to do, and tell me, please add to this, is try to show what difference does this make in their lives. Like going back to the thing, what difference does it make if we have a soul or not? Hey, Pete, a student might be saying, this is great that we're having this discussion, but my parents are going through a divorce, or I've got bills to pay, or my girlfriend or boyfriend just broke up with me, so what difference does this make in life? How does this make a difference for me today? And that's one of the challenges and things we have to keep in mind as we present material, as we present activities and discussions and papers and all these things is why this is important, or how does it pay off? The old cliche of, how am I going to use this in life? What do you think?
Those examples that you just brought up, the breaking up with a boyfriend or significant other, your parents are just getting divorced, you just got fired from your job, someone passed away that was close to you. Those are all things that can be points of dismissal for students, and they can get checked out. Or you can tell them, let's take that moment of vulnerability and apply it to this time where you might not get a chance to talk about it anywhere else. And I think it's a great point to sort of also extend on in another episode, because you always want to keep them wanting more. One of the topics we will talk about later on down the road is exposure. Is how do you take some of the content that might be a bit more vulnerable for students to talk about and get them to expand on it, get them to think about it, get them to get to that point of discomfort that gets them outside of those boxes that they may not want to get out of, and let them see as and this is a handoff to Pedro that the cave has more light at the end of it, when we can become enlightened from getting out of the cave of uncertainty.
Oh, I love it when you talk Socrates and Plato to me.
Socrates it to me. And that's a good place to end this week. So, as always, as we've said on previous podcasts, the Paul Newman quote of taking our work seriously, but taking ourselves lightly. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Classroom Hacks. And next time when we come back, we will be focusing on the tips and tricks that you might get to use in the classroom. Maybe things that might make it a little easier for your time in class, and that can give you a bit more stress-free moments throughout any given semester. So this has been Classroom Hacks. Hope you've enjoyed yourself. Pedro, he's bowing. So this is our bow, our courtesy, our arrivederci. We'll see you next time.
Peace.